Some states hide their secrets underground. Missouri lets them bleed through the surface. In its forests, screams echo with no mouths. In its towns, stories vanish faster than names. And the silence? It doesn't mean nothing happened. It means no one wants to say what did. Here the strange isn't just folklore, it's part of the dirt. And some say Missouri doesn't forget. It just waits until you're close enough to notice. Put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and cover yourself well, because after this video, you'll never see Missouri the same way again. The phantom town of Times Beach. Some cities are abandoned, others are erased, before they realize why. Times Beach was supposed to be a quiet getaway, a weekend town for St. Louis residents looking for peace near the Merrimack River. Built on low ground but high in hopes. Founded in 1925, it had small homes, a post office, and one gas station. Most of the families there were working class. They kept to themselves. The streets were dusty and unpaved. So in the early 70s, the city hired a man with a truck to spray them with oil to keep the dust down. That's where the story begins to rot. The man they hired, Russell Bliss, had been paid to dispose of chemical waste from various companies, including a pharmaceutical firm that made Agent Orange. What he sprayed on Times Beach's roads wasn't oil. It was a deadly compound containing dioxin, one of the most toxic chemicals known to man. Nobody knew, not at first. But the animals started dying. Birds dropped from trees, pets got sick, children broke out in rashes no doctor could explain. For a while the town pretended it wasn't happening. Then came 1982. A historic flood hit the region. When FEMA and the EPA responded to the disaster, they tested the soil for contaminants. What they found in Times Beach was unthinkable. Dioxin levels 300 times higher than the safe limit. The whole town was declared unsafe. The government bought every home, evacuated every family, and by 1983, Times Beach was gone. Some residents refused to go at first. Others returned quietly to collect family heirlooms or check on the damage. They described something strange, not just the emptiness, but a feeling. A man named Charles L., who'd grown up there, told a regional newspaper in 1986, "I went back to get my father's tools, but the house felt wrong, like someone was still in the next room, just not moving." Another woman, Mary Ann R., reported, "The silence wasn't peaceful. It was like being inside a held breath. I kept hearing footsteps on the floor upstairs, but we tore that floor out before we left." During the cleanup, teams of EPA workers wore hazmat suits and respirators, but even with full protection, they felt watched. An EPA supervisor later confessed to a colleague in a taped interview, "You'd look up and swear you saw someone move inside a boarded-up house, but when you'd check, nothing. Not even footprints in the dust." Some of them refused to go back in alone. One team left a note behind in an abandoned living room that simply read, "Don't stay past sundown." Today, the town has been repurposed into Route 66 State Park. There are walking trails and a visitor center built out of one of the last standing structures from the old town. But people who hike there say the woods feel too quiet. One visitor claimed their camera shut off near the center of the park, and when it restarted, all their audio was replaced by whispers. Others report hearing footsteps pacing beside them, though no one is visible. Multiple guests have left online reviews warning about a white shape that moves between trees, just out of focus. No animals are kept in the park, but visitors report barking and breathing. In 1997, long after the cleanup was declared complete, a journalist filed a Freedom of Information request and received documents confirming that not all materials were removed. Some areas had been too dangerous to dig, so they were paved over. And under those trails, beneath the soil and the roots, something may still be alive. Not biologically, but in the way radiation is alive, in the way trauma is alive, in the way a town can die and still not rest. But while Times Beach was buried in silence, one house, hundreds of miles away, refused to stay quiet, even after everyone inside had died. The murder house of Cape Girardeau. Some houses hold memories. This one held something that pushed back. On the outer edge of Cape Girardeau, close to the old train line and just beyond the fading hum of downtown, there stood a two-story clapboard house that nobody talked about in daylight, and nobody passed by at night. The stairs inside that house had claimed 3 lives, all in different years, all by falling, all without witnesses. The first fall happened in 1965, a teenage boy who'd been sneaking through the abandoned property. His parents said he was athletic. The coroner said his neck broke instantly. 12 years later, in 1977, a drifter was found at the base of the same staircase. Dead. No ID. No sign of a struggle. But one eerie detail stood out. The soles of his shoes had been removed. Then in 1983, a postal worker went missing on his route. 2 days later, they found him inside the house, at the bottom of the stairs. Mailbag intact. Neck snapped clean. Locals started calling it the house that pushed. Teenagers dared each other to spend a night inside. Only a few ever did. Those who returned reported strange sounds, shuffling footsteps on wood floors, though the boards were rotted, breathing from upstairs, even when no one was there. One girl claimed the light from her flashlight bent unnaturally when aimed at the staircase. A 1985 police report, never officially released, includes the phrase, "Subject claims force on chest during descent, no visible injuries, unexplained bruising across shoulder blades." In 1988, the city finally moved to tear it down, but demolition didn't go smoothly. On the first day, a worker ascending the staircase slipped and broke his leg. He told co-workers, "Something grabbed my boot from behind." The foreman dismissed it as nerves, until the next morning when his own hard hat was found, split in 2, at the bottom of the stairs. They finished the demolition. The structure came down. The wood was hauled off, the ground was leveled, but what happened next only deepened the mystery. Within weeks, residents of the neighboring houses began to complain. Sudden drops in temperature, electrical interference, feelings of dizziness when walking near the lot. One woman reported waking up at 3:17 a.m., the exact estimated time of death for the final victim, with the sound of wooden steps creaking in her kitchen. There were no stairs in her home. In 1994, a group of local paranormal researchers visited the site with ground-penetrating radar. What they found was unnerving. The GPR detected what appeared to be vertical interruptions in the soil, spaced exactly like stair risers, as if, beneath the surface, the staircase was still there. A professor from Southeast Missouri State University, who reviewed the scans, said, "We see anomalies consistent with a structure that should no longer exist. The data suggests vertical density change, possibly residual, or possibly still intact." The land was never resold. Today it's just a weedy patch of fenced-in earth near a train siding, but people walking past have reported sudden pulls on their clothing, a force like static electricity, or an odd heaviness in their chest. In 2021, a maintenance worker clearing brush claimed he felt his boot stick to the dirt. When he pulled it free, the tread had partially melted, in the shape of a worn wooden plank. He never returned. Locals whisper that the staircase never left, that it isn't tied to a house but to the space itself. Some believe it's a kind of architectural echo, a trauma left behind too deep for demolition to erase. And maybe it's not pushing, maybe it's inviting, but if one staircase still waits in silence, what crashed in Cape Girardeau in 1941 was anything but silent, and what people saw that night was never meant to be identified. The crashed UFO of Cape Girardeau, 1941. Roswell made the headlines, but Cape Girardeau happened first. In the spring of 1941, just months before America entered World War II, something fell from the sky in the woods outside Cape Girardeau. Not a plane, not a weather balloon, but something no one could explain and no one was supposed to talk about. It began with a phone call. A well-known local pastor, Reverend William Huffman, was called late at night by a member of the local police. A crash had occurred just outside the city limits. They needed him to pray over the bodies. The pastor went, and what he saw there, according to his family, haunted him for the rest of his life. Reverend Huffman arrived to find law enforcement and emergency responders already on site. The crash site was lit by vehicle headlights. A strange metallic object, silver, smooth, and partially embedded in the ground, lay broken among the trees. But it wasn't the object that froze him. It was the 3 small bodies laid out beside it. They were not human. According to Huffman's granddaughter, Charlotte Mann, who later gave a detailed televised interview, he described them as grey-skinned, with large eyes, no hair, and very small in size. He said one might still have been alive when he arrived. The inside of the craft, he said, was covered in unfamiliar symbols, not like any writing he'd seen before. Within hours, the site was secured by military personnel. Witnesses were warned to remain silent. The bodies and the wreckage were taken away. No news outlets covered the story. No official report was ever filed publicly. But the people who were there didn't forget, and some left behind more than memories. Years later, Reverend Huffman confided in his family. He was terrified to speak publicly, but he told them everything. His granddaughter described seeing an old black and white photo, supposedly taken at the site, showing two men standing over a small alien figure. That photo disappeared over time, possibly destroyed by the family, possibly taken. But the story remained. In the early 2000s, local researchers uncovered audio cassettes recorded by Huffman's son, describing the event in vivid detail. These tapes now circulate in UFO investigator circles, and the case is often referred to as the first Roswell. Modern-day paranormal investigators who visit the reported crash site, a wooded area now near private farmland, claim unusual activity still occurs there. EMF anomalies, electromagnetic field spikes, battery drain on cameras and phones, animal avoidance. Deer and birds go silent near a particular clearing. One investigator in 2015 claimed to hear a metallic hum from underground. Locals report lights over the tree line some nights. Others say they've seen shapes standing still in the woods, just out of range of headlights, figures that vanish if approached. Why wasn't this story bigger? Because it was 1941. There was no Air Force, no national obsession with aliens. There was war in Europe and fear at home. But those who were there, or who knew the people who were, say the government acted fast, quiet, and with purpose. Some believe Cape Girardeau was the first recovery, that everything learned there led directly to how Roswell was handled years later. And that's why this story was buried deeper. There is no plaque, no marker, no historical sign at the crash site, only a few worn trails and stories that refuse to die, because while the government never confirmed it, they also never denied it. And that silence? It still hums beneath the soil. But while something once fell from Missouri's sky, deeper in the forests near Pomona, something still rises, every night, screaming. The screaming forest near Devil's Backbone. In some woods, you hear wildlife. In others, you hear something that shouldn't exist at all. Deep in southern Missouri, near the town of Pomona, there's a section of forest that locals know by feel before name. It's part of the Ozark Highlands, rugged, overgrown, and largely untouched. But those who hike the marked trails at Devil's Backbone Wilderness know there's a place you're not supposed to veer into. No signs, no fences, just a silence that comes too fast. And then, the screaming starts. The main trails through Devil's Backbone are mapped and moderately trafficked. But west of the designated paths, there's a dense section of trees with no name. Locals call it the Pocket. Others, more grimly, call it the Screaming Woods. Since the 1970s, hikers have reported the same sequence. 1. Sudden drop in sound. No birds, no insects. 2. Heavy feeling in the chest. 3. Then around 3:01 a.m., a human scream from somewhere deep in the trees, but not near, not far, just there. Park rangers in the 1980s investigated the area after multiple reports. They found no animals, no disturbed earth, no evidence of people living in the woods. One ranger wrote in his report, "The noise isn't traveling, it's just arriving, like it was waiting." They tried overnight surveillance in 1986, set up a microphone grid. 3 nights, nothing. 4th night, a scream so loud it blew out the central mic and cracked a secondary one. The waveform looked mechanical, but the sound was undeniably human. The screams, for reasons no one understands, only occur between late September and early November. Locals now know to avoid that part of the woods after dark during those months. A hunter who passed through the edge of the zone in 1994 said he heard 3 screams. One sounded like a woman, the second like a child, and the last was something I've never heard before. He dropped his rifle and ran. Later, he claimed that for 2 weeks, his dog refused to be in the same room with him. Online forums and local hiking groups often share stories of the silent zone in Devil's Backbone. Some say tents collapse on their own there. Others report waking up outside the area they pitched camp, with no memory of moving. A hiker in 2003 wrote, "We set up camp on a slight rise, no wind, no rain. At 2:47 a.m. we heard the scream. My friend bolted. When I looked up, the stars were gone, like a hand was covering the sky." An amateur radio enthusiast in 2011 captured a strange frequency while hiking alone in the area. He described it as a pulse, low, rhythmic. Then, a single sharp modulation, like a voice without breath. It hurt to listen to. When he played it back at home, the recording had no audio, just static with a faint reverb, like something had been there, and then deliberately scrubbed. Some think it's wind tunneling through the ridges. Others believe it's tied to an old mine shaft collapse, with air escaping through unseen vents. But the people who've heard it know better. A scream that makes animals flee. A sound that doesn't move, it chooses. A place that stays unmarked, unclaimed, and unwanted. Some say it's not a haunting, but a warning, that something in that part of the forest doesn't want to be seen, only heard. Heard enough that you'll leave and never come back. But if the forest can scream to drive you away, what happens when the dead call you closer from beneath your feet? The Reappearing Grave at Old Lorimier Cemetery. Cemeteries are where we leave the dead behind, but some graves don't stay put. Old Lorimier Cemetery in Cape Girardeau is one of the oldest burial grounds in the entire state. Its earliest headstones date back to the early 1800s, with many believed to be older, their names long eroded, their records lost. It overlooks the Mississippi River, a hilltop of silence and moss-covered markers. It's a quiet place, until something that shouldn't exist returns. In the early 1990s, cemetery staff began to report something strange. A single gravestone, thin, white, unremarkable, would appear in different areas of the grounds, always the same. Same size, same faint carving, same name. Except, no one recognized the name. It wasn't listed in the burial registry. It didn't match any family plot. And when they tried to move it, it disappeared again. Curious visitors tried taking photos. Digital, analog, didn't matter. Every time the result was the same. The gravestone came out as a blur, or wasn't in the frame at all. Or, worse, the photo file became corrupted. One amateur photographer claimed that after reviewing her pictures at home, her entire SD card was unreadable, except for one glitched image with the outline of a face behind the gravestone. She never returned. Caretakers began noticing something else. Some mornings, the ground around the stone was freshly disturbed, as if something had been buried or unburied. One worker claimed the soil was damp and warm, even during a cold October morning. The gravestone itself sometimes leaned slightly, like it had been recently placed by hand. No tracks, no prints, no tools, no answers. Researchers tried to trace the name on the stone. At first, it seemed to match a child listed in a city death ledger from 1874, a girl who died of unknown causes and was reportedly buried outside church approval. But records from that era are incomplete. Some believe the girl's burial was unofficial, possibly linked to ritual practices no longer spoken of. A retired local historian noted, "This cemetery has Masonic burials, war dead, and victims of old plagues. But this doesn't fit any pattern. It's as if the grave doesn't belong to the cemetery, but the cemetery belongs to it." In 2012, a paranormal team from Kansas City visited the site. They brought EMF meters, thermal cams, and a simple magnet. When placed near the base of the reappeared gravestone, the magnet tilted, as if repelled. They repeated the test twice more. Same result. When they returned the next month, the stone was gone again. All that remained was a single, hand-sized imprint in the dirt. One team member later reported strange dreams for weeks, all involving graves, rivers, and a child staring from behind a tree. Locals now say the stone doesn't mark a death, it marks a return, that whatever was buried beneath it never belonged in the cemetery, or in this world. Some believe the stone appears as a warning. Others claim it's a beacon, a signal that something is still incomplete. A few say the name on the stone has changed over the years, that it takes the name of whoever last saw it. True or not, no one has ever seen the stone twice, But if the grave comes back when no one's watching, what waits behind a locked door, in a building that should have stayed buried too? The abandoned Masons' Hall of Lebanon. Some buildings are empty, others are just hiding what's inside. On a quiet street just beyond the center of Lebanon, Missouri, stands a forgotten structure that once belonged to one of the oldest Masonic lodges in the region. Built in the early 1900s, it was grand in its time, heavy limestone, arched windows, hand-carved wooden doors. But by the late 1960s, the lodge was quietly dissolved. The building was sealed. No official reason was ever given, and ever since no one's been able to stay inside for long. In the late 90s, a local group of urban explorers managed to get inside. They mapped what they could. 2 floors, a wide atrium with rotted benches, 3 meeting rooms with dusty chairs still arranged in circles. And then, something didn't line up. The internal layout didn't match the external footprint. Rooms were too big, or at strange angles. One staircase seemed to rise higher than the building allowed, then ended in a blank wall. A member of the group reported, "It was like the building was fighting its own blueprint." At the back of the second floor was a heavy wooden door. No knob, just a pattern of symbols burned into the wood. Not Masonic, not religious. More like an equation written by hand over and over. They couldn't open it. When one member knocked, they heard 3 knocks back from the other side. They left immediately. Locals say the windows glow faintly at night, even though the building hasn't had electricity for decades. One man swears he saw figures moving inside, not walking but sliding across the floor. A woman walking her dog past the building in 2004 reported hearing chanting. When she looked up, the window nearest her fogged up, and a single fingerprint appeared from the inside. There's no access to that floor anymore. The stairs are gone. In 2010, a retired contractor claimed in a radio interview that he once worked on a renovation project in the early 1970s. "We were told to reinforce a foundation room, but when we broke the old floor, there was a sealed shaft, like a stone tunnel going straight down. They were ordered to pour concrete and forget it." He asked what was down there. The answer, "You don't want to be the one who finds out." A faded ledger from the early 1900s was recovered by a researcher in 2015. It listed all known Masonic rituals of the lodge, except the final page, which was torn. The impression left on the last sheet was enhanced by scanning software. It read, "We open the gate, not to power, but to memory. Not all who enter should remember." In 1998, 3 teens broke in on Halloween. Only one returned. He refused to speak publicly for 20 years. In a 2019 interview, he finally said, "It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't demons. It was like the walls were alive, like they didn't want us to leave. The 3rd floor didn't exist until it did. And that door, the carved one, it wasn't closed anymore." When asked what was behind the door, he just said, "Something standing, waiting." The city now considers the building unsafe. It's chained off, windows blacked out. But every few years, someone tries to enter and comes back shaken or not at all. The building doesn't want to be torn down, it wants to be remembered. And it's not empty. It's occupied by memory, trapped in wood, stone, and silence. Some places are abandoned, some are erased. But the ones that whisper back, Missouri remembers those. If any of these stayed with you, it's because they're not done. Tap the playlist. Leave a like if you made it out, because some mysteries don't want to be solved. They want to be seen.